It started as an ordinary day for a little black girl and her father in their quiet neighborhood. But in an instant, everything changed when they found themselves face to face with a group of officers whose actions quickly turned alarming. Words were exchanged, harsh, unjust, and filled with undertones that no child should ever have to hear. The little girl, confused and scared, clung to her father, who stood firm, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. What happened next was something no one saw coming. This father's response not only protected his daughter, but sparked a global conversation, leaving people speechless and calling for change. His actions turned into a powerful message of resilience, justice, and love that shook the world. But what exactly did he do? Stick around as we unravel this extraordinary story of courage in the face of adversity. The father, a man known in his community for his quiet strength and deep love for his family, found himself at a crossroads. As the officers' voices grew louder and more aggressive, the air felt heavy with tension. Neighbors peeked through curtains, unsure of what they were witnessing but unable to look away. The little girl, no older than 8, gripped her father's hand tightly, her wide eyes searching his face for reassurance. He crouched down, whispering something in her ear that no one else could hear. Whatever he said, it seemed to give her a small spark of courage, though she still held on to him as if her life depended on it. The situation escalated. The officers, seemingly emboldened, pressed harder, their words now a mixture of orders and accusations. The father didn't react the way anyone expected. Instead of anger or submission, he did something that left everyone stunned. The father stood tall, his calm demeanor almost unsettling in the face of such hostility. Instead of shouting or fighting back, he took out his phone and began recording the encounter. His voice was steady but firm as he asked the officers why they had approached him and his daughter. The camera captured every word, every expression, and every unsettling detail. The officers, caught off guard, shifted uncomfortably but continued their aggressive questioning. The father's refusal to engage in anger seemed to frustrate them even more, but he remained focused, shielding his daughter both physically and emotionally. Meanwhile, onlookers began to gather at a safe distance, some recording on their own phones. Whispers rippled through the small crowd, questions, disbelief, and quiet outrage. Among them was a neighbor who had seen the little girl playing just hours earlier, carefree and full of laughter. Now, that same child stood silently, her small hand clutching her father's arm. The weight of the moment hung heavy as the father, with quiet determination, turned the situation into something no one expected, a spotlight on injustice. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. The father's unwavering calm seemed to amplify the unease among the officers, their rigid stances betraying their discomfort. One of them, visibly irritated, reached for the phone in an attempt to stop the recording. But before they could act, the father took a deliberate step back, raising his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "We are not doing anything wrong," he said, his words clear and measured. "My daughter and I have the right to be here, just like anyone else." His voice carried a quiet power, and the crowd watching grew larger, their murmurs growing louder. More phones were raised, more eyes focused on the unfolding scene. The officers, perhaps realizing the growing attention, hesitated, but their tone didn't soften. The little girl looked up at her father, her grip loosening slightly as if she sensed his strength was enough for them both. But then something unexpected happened. A voice broke through the crowd, a woman, an elder in the community, stepping forward with her own phone recording. Her presence seemed to shift the dynamic, her words cutting through the chaos like a beacon of truth. "We see what's happening here," she said firmly, "and we won't stay silent." The officers froze, their eyes darting between the growing crowd and the father, who now stood as a symbol of defiance and protection. The moment teetered on the edge of something monumental, and everyone braced for what would happen next. The tension only deepened as the elder's voice echoed through the crowd. Her courage seemed to inspire others, and soon more people began to step forward, their phones raised, their presence signaling solidarity. The officers glanced nervously at each other, the weight of so many eyes now pressing down on them. It felt like the power was shifting, until one officer, the one who seemed most agitated, took a step closer to the father. His voice was sharp as he warned the man to comply or face the consequences. But instead of fear, the father's response was calm, deliberate. He reached into his pocket, pulling out something that made everyone pause: a folder. Inside were documents, proof of his innocence, and his right to stand exactly where he was. He held them up for everyone to see, and the crowd murmured in disbelief. It was a calculated move, one that turned the spotlight even brighter on the officer's actions. Just as it seemed the situation might de-escalate, another twist caught everyone off guard. A second police vehicle pulled up, and out stepped a senior officer. The crowd grew silent, unsure of whether this new presence would bring resolution or escalation. The senior officer's face was unreadable as they approached, taking in the scene, the crowd, and the unwavering father. For a brief moment, everything hung in the balance, and the tension was almost suffocating. What happened next would either ignite the situation or change the course of the story entirely. The senior officer took a long, assessing look at the father, the little girl clutching his side, the crowd with their cameras ready, and finally, the officers standing stiffly, their authority beginning to waver. The air was thick with expectation. In a firm but calm tone, the senior officer addressed the father directly, asking for the details of what had transpired. The father, still holding the folder, calmly explained everything: how the encounter began, the officer's behavior, and the fear it had instilled in his young daughter. His words were deliberate, his voice unwavering, and each detail struck a chord with the watching crowd. The senior officer's expression shifted slightly, the weight of the situation evident in their eyes. Turning to the officers involved, they asked for their account. But before they could respond, another voice emerged from the crowd, a neighbor who had captured everything on video. "I have the whole thing," she said, holding her phone up. "We all do." At that moment, it became clear that the officer's actions couldn't be hidden. The senior officer reviewed the situation with a seriousness that left everyone holding their breath. After a tense pause, the senior officer did something no one anticipated. They apologized. Turning to the father, they acknowledged the wrong that had been done and assured him that steps would be taken to address the misconduct. The crowd erupted in a mix of relief and muted cheers, but just as the father began to thank the senior officer, the twist came. The father, with calm conviction, handed over a second document from his folder, a formal complaint he had already prepared, anticipating such an encounter might one day occur. It wasn't just about his daughter or himself, it was about the larger issue of justice. The senior officer took the document, visibly stunned by the man's foresight and determination. In that moment, the father didn't just protect his child, he ignited a movement. The crowd's cheers grew louder, their voices carrying the promise of change as the father stood tall, holding his daughter close, a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. As the crowd began to disperse, the father knelt down to his daughter's level, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "You're so brave," he said softly, his voice filled with pride. She managed a small smile, leaning into his embrace, knowing that her father had stood up not just for her, but for something much bigger. The senior officer assured the father that a full investigation would follow, and as they left the scene, the father and his daughter walked away together, hand in hand, their bond stronger than ever. The video of the incident spread rapidly, sparking outrage but also inspiring hope. People across the world saw the father's courage and the power of a united community. It became a reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of adversity. In the end, this story wasn't just about one family, it was about the fight for justice and the belief that change is possible when people come together.